Alrighty, here we are with the second leg of our research class. What we're going to be talking about now is evaluating sources, and the first half of this is going to have to be what questions you got to ask for your source. So let's go way back for a second because I do like talking about this story because it's something I always find fascinating about how technology impacts communication and culture. Basically, since we have a telegraph, information is about having a race to get the info out as fast as possible. Even without trying to, deliberately lie, you're going to get stuff wrong. If you want a good example of that, just go with the bomb threats with the 1996 Olympics. The guy who found the bombs was initially reported as being the bomber, and that led to a whole lot of trouble. Here's my personal favorite story about this sort of thing. Long time ago, a guy named Arnold was flying in an airplane, and he saw a group of planes flying in formation, and he said they moved like they were bouncing on water, or like a saucer if you skip it on water, specifically. And he said they were thin and flat when viewed from the edge. This gets talked about. They wanted to cut down flying like a saucer if you skip it across water, and that became flying saucer. That's right, Kenneth Arnold was talking entirely about planes, regular planes, but what got repeated was flying saucers. The fact is that newspapers wanted to get new news out fast, and that leads to that exact same sort of mistake. They shortened the message so it could go faster and be reported faster, and it in turn created the image of a circular flying saucer, as opposed to airplanes flying without propellers. In our current year, we know this is actually talking about jets, but at the time they didn't really have a term for that, and they did not have a large-scale knowledge of jet engines, so yeah, they were a weird flying device. And this is back when there were telegraphs, okay? This is back when newspapers had to send messages down the wire on a telegraph. This is not even talking about days when we have social media platforms jockeying for stuff and trying to get our attention economy. The demand is going up. The demand will always go up. I like this quote from the Wisconsin Editorial Association. In telegraph matters, quantity takes precedent over quality. Not half of the stuff which comes by telegraph would be printed in our columns if it came by another mode of conveyance. But there is a public veracity for telegraphic news that will not be appeased by any substitute, nor any assurance that what was omitted or did not come was of no account. The appetite grows in what it feeds on, like a novel reading appetite for the young, or a whiskey or opium appetite for the old. And like I said, that was 1874. That was before people even had planes, and yet the Kenneth Arnold incident still happened. This isn't going away anytime soon. I like this diagram, but I'm going to be honest, it doesn't have social media, which is just even earlier than same day. We've got internet, TV, and radio, and it can tell you who, what, where by journalists and also the public, and it's for the general public. And that's the same sort of thing you have with social media, so I guess you could kind of get away with putting that in there. But the next day, you're going to have news articles. That's when you have something like a newspaper or a channel or anything like that where they can call and fact check with people and just get someone to confirm a story. If you've ever heard of someone talking about getting a confirmation of the story, that's what they're talking about. Again, this is still going in the general public's direction. It's the same sort of thing. Then weeks later, you're going to get something like they have magazines listed, but you also just have online news sites and that sort of thing where people go over something weeks later. Because of the format, it's going to be coming out later, which means you're going to have better chances of getting as many perspectives as you can. Of course, the next step of that is your scholarly journals. That's going to be something that has to be peer-reviewed, which means people try to recreate the same conditions and see that they can confirm this happened. This is all sorts of stuff when it comes to whenever you hear someone talk about, oh, hey, someone found this new technology, peer-reviewed stuff, it has to also go through and do that. And that's where you get the scholarly journals that are able to confirm stuff. And then, of course, they have books. Now, the thing about books is books are not always the most accurate, but especially if you're talking about scholarly research and stuff, one of the big things about it is books take years to make. And if a book takes years to make, then that means that information out there has been widely circulating. By the time something is a book, we have a much clearer idea of what was actually happening. Another thing is, you got to know the difference between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation, it's when someone's doing it on accident. They're spreading something that's found to be incorrect. Disinformation, though, that's when someone is deliberately spreading information with the intent to sway populations' opinions. That's where you have stuff like propaganda, you have smear campaigns, you have people trying to manipulate narratives. That's disinformation. And that is something that is actually malicious. The way I always talk about this sort of thing is you got to talk about crap. You got to talk about the currency, the relevance, the authority, the accuracy, and the purpose. Currency is how timely is the information. When was it published? Has the information been revised or updated? What's the current or out-of-date stuff that you need to pay attention for? A lot of times if you're looking at stuff on the web, see if those links still work? Because if the links don't work, or the links go to something and says, oh, yeah, actually we were wrong, that means something very different. Relevance. How relevant is this for your topic? Is it actually trying to write something for you? There are a lot of folks who will pick up an academic journal who don't have enough of the background to understand the terms and end up mistaking something. If you've ever heard someone say, well, evolution is just a theory, because they're using a colloquial definition of theory. Now, the colloquial term theory is this is somebody's idea or something like that. In a scientific journal, a theory is an explanation for something that has been observed and able to be proven in experiments. So in other words, if something is a theory in a scientific journal, that means someone's already proved it. But if you say, well, I have a theory in colloquial language, that means something different. So that's why you got to go with the relevance and the authority. The authority is the other part of that, which is someone has to actually be someone who's knowledgeable about the subject when they're talking about it. That's why every time you see some sort of news article, they try to get a talking head in of somebody who's like an expert in such and such field. If you're watching news or something and then they cut to, hey, well, we got such and such who's an expert on international relations. That's why they're there. They're looking for someone with the authority. And then, of course, you got to talk about the accuracy. See, the thing is that some of this stuff, you got to figure out where the info's coming from. There's a viral news story that comes out every few years of someone who is talking about North Korea, and she says people had to push train cars to move them because, now here's the thing, North Korea has a documented history of human rights abuses. However, if you literally try to get a bunch of people to push the type of car that they were talking about, it's physically impossible. And so while this person may be putting out a story about North Korea, the information they're giving you is not accurate. And that's a big thing, because then that person's bad info calls into question the rest of the stuff in there. For instance, like I talked about seeing someone talk about an expert on the field. If the person who is telling the weird train car pushing story that was physically impossible, then you got to sit there and look and say, listen, even if I agree with this information, even if this information seems correct for me, it might not be the best source. I have to go look for a different source of information. And that's the thing about that, is because the last thing we're talking about is the purpose. So here's the thing. Some people are talking heads because that's their job. I'm not even talking about propaganda at this point. I'm talking about literally just their job is to give opinions on stuff. And if they're doing that because that is their job, you've got to sit there and think about what their purpose of having this job is. Some people are academics and studying stuff. Some people are subject matter experts because it's something they really care about. Other people are there entirely for a paycheck. As such, there needs to be an issue for that person to talk about. One thing I always remember is just every time there's a new rumor about Taylor Swift, there is a vested interest in there being rumors about Taylor Swift for all the people who publish Taylor Swift rumors. So remember that, because there is a reason that every piece of information you read exists. So always pay attention, especially celebrity rumors. Places need rumors to exist to make money, to advertise, to keep in the public consciousness. So always evaluate the purpose. Again, currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, purpose. That's how you give a crap. The other thing is you got to question everything, even if it's something I agree with. Okay, who's the central figure of the story? What is the story trying to depict? Where did this happen? Why did it happen? When did it happen? You just got to sit there and ask about all these sorts of things. Well, there's many times you'll see somebody trying to have a viral news story and they're trying to share something around on social media. If you go through and look, you're like, wait, this story happened years ago. Every once in a while, I'll see like a weird news story and they talk about a news story that happened in the 90s, but they just did not check the date on the news story when they shared it. In the immediate aftermath of something, especially if there's a disaster, people are going to get stuff wrong. Even if they're doing their best, there will always be things that are wrong. Don't trust an anonymous source in the immediate aftermath. As time goes on, if someone can validate that this anonymous source is a real person and that sort of thing, then we can talk about it. But validating an anonymous source takes a lot of time, and in the immediate aftermath of stuff, you do not get that. Other thing, don't trust stories that cite another news outlet. I mean, don't get me wrong, the AP, the Associated Press, will sometimes be a news story that just other news presenters will just share. But if the only source of information is just news articles, posting other news articles, and it never has the primary source, where it originally came from, that's something you got to watch out for. As they always say, there's almost never a second shooter. There's a lot of rumors that'll be coming around and people are going to be talking about stuff. And then, of course, always pay attention to the words you're hearing. We are getting reports. We are seeking confirmation. News outlet has learned. All those mean that they are couching their statement in a qualifier to say, we didn't say that Prowl the cat is actually secretly plotting against my my friend Lisa. We just said that people are saying that Prowl the cat is plotting against Lisa. And that's the thing, is that that's a way you can get a controversial rumor out there without actually having proof of this sort of thing. You can just, all you need to do there is report, in that case, that somebody said this somewhere. And the thing is of course, if I report, hey, somebody told me Prowl is actually plotting against Lisa, you're going to hear Prowl is actually plotting against Lisa. You will not hear somebody told me. So let's get into actually going through and evaluating sources. You're not always going to have an easy time to do this. Sometimes you make mistakes. That's one thing that we always need to understand, is that if we make mistakes, that's understandable and we need to do well to move forward. Compare your sources. Go outside your bubble. Find people who you don't normally agree with and see if they actually are talking about the same sort of thing. Sometimes they might have something different that they're taking away from it, but if they can confirm the same thing happened, that's a very, very important thing to look at. Find primary sources. Like I said, don't go with the news article citing a news article citing a news article. A lot of these news articles are citing real things and specific events. They'll have links to pictures, events, stories that are posted on social media, all these things. They will have links to stuff. They should, a good one should, have the ability for you to go see whatever primary source they're talking about. Also, check your biases. Just do it, because let's face it, everybody has an unconscious bias. Bias is not always necessarily a bad thing. It's something that lets your brain prepare ahead of time for stuff as it comes up. But it is still there and it's still present, and you need to really think about that. And also, here's the thing. It's not just me. It's never just me. The person writing that article is going to have a bias too. And that's the other thing you got to talk about. You got to look at what terms they use, what kind of language they do. As if you've ever heard of the phrase, an officer-involved shooting, it's very different than, say, shot by police. Those are very different terms, and those could be ways of showing the bias of the person writing the article. Here's the big things. You look for actions. Actions are going to trump talking. See what someone is doing. There are a lot of folks who will try to say after an event something about why they did what they did. They're going to sit there and talk about it afterwards, but look at what actions were done. Look for other events in history that are similar to this one. That's a big thing. Look at other events, because if you can look at other events, you can see patterns. You can see what's different and what's the same. What else does this source cover? Because sometimes you can just go to another page and realize, oh, wait a second, I'm reading a satire site, but one article is just not necessarily clear enough. Who else is involved in reporting this? There are entire networks in the internet age where you have entire networks based around specific political leanings. Just going to say that. There are literally entire things where it's like news from a leftist perspective. Here's news from a far-right perspective. Look at who is involved reporting stuff. Sometimes you don't have to worry, but it's important to be aware of it regardless. Also, what's not being reported? Look at what other questions you might have reading a news story. If someone said a bomb went off at a location, what do you not know about that event? Is there an event going on? Was there anybody there? Was the place being demolished? Because if all of a sudden it turns out the explosion was literally someone just imploding a building for demolition, that's a very different type of thing. Fact is that doesn't even have to be malicious. That can just be stuff getting cut for time, and that's, of course, how you get flying saucers. Here's one. It's a website called Inside the Magic. It says Mickey Mouse is officially being retired. Written by a guy named Nathan Kamal. Disney's talking about getting rid of Mickey Mouse. Right? Okay, if you actually read the article, it does not include any actions. It just is people talking about that stuff. There is no actual discussion of a current event action happening. It's just people talking about it. Inside the Magic also said that Disney was going to stop the Disney Channel. That's another viral story that's come out of there. It's a clickbait site. Also, if you just straight up Google Disney retiring Mickey Mouse, you don't get any other news stories. Turns out that no other sources are covering this. And also, that guy writes for The Hard Times, which is a satire news site. Finally, if you read the article, there is no actual comment from Disney. They did not ask or do not have anything officially from Disney because this is a satire article written on a humor site. Every time I do this class, I try to look at some sort of popular news story that's worth going over and talking about how this sort of thing about a source evaluation affects it. Right now, we've got all those drone sightings. People keep posting videos of drones, asking about them, all that stuff. Well, the top picture I've got located there is from an AI-generated video. It is someone doing a tech demo, but someone took the tech demo, posted it on social media, and said that's what was going on in New Jersey. Then, of course, you've got misattributed images. Somebody says it's a crash drone in Orange Beach. No, that is a fake TIE fighter from a sci-fi convention they had set up for photo options because of Star Wars. And here's the thing about it also. The New Jersey drone sightings are a developing story. There are different things people discuss. There are different things that people will be discussing for years now. It is a story where you need to sit there and think about, okay, well, what's being reported? Well, people are reporting that a lot of times people are reporting that someone said they saw saw drones. There's a lot less actual footage of the drones than is actually getting reported. Other times, you got to figure out who it is, going through all these sorts of things. Well, here's another question. Like they say, how many drones were there? Well, there's ones where they say it's anywhere between like 3 and 20. Well, that's a big difference. So you got to pay attention to this sort of thing. But also, here's the other thing. Look at other events similar to this. So at the bottom right is a guy named Philip Klass. He wrote a book called UFOs, the Public Deceived. It's a very interesting book about research. I just genuinely find it a great book when it comes to discussing research methodology, also how developing stories will always have new info that come out later. Philip Klass's thing involves discussion of going through and looking at every UFO sighting he could get good info on. When we have congressional hearings and they say, oh yes, there are UFOs, what they are saying is there are literally unidentified flying objects. There are objects that they could not identify. That's not saying anything, but what we got to do is go through and do research and try to figure out what's going on, try to figure out what we're looking at, that sort of thing. Because every time there is some sort of major conflict or something like that in American history, there is a scare about stuff that's a flying machine. Some sort of flying machine, at least. In 1914, I'm not even kidding, 1914, same place, New Jersey, had panics about lights in the skies where they thought there were German planes invading New Jersey. No, it was a combination of planes. It was a combination of regular stuff that was being used. It was a combination of misidentified kites. It was all sorts of stuff like that. And then in 1942, during World War II, we had what was called the Battle of Los Angeles. That's the picture I've got up there. That's a news story. Interestingly enough, number one, if you actually go and look up the big picture with all those beams of light, that is actually something that was touched up for the newspaper. The actual picture does not look anything like that. There's not really any object that they're looking at. It's just a bunch of searchlights crossing over. They added the contrast to make it look like they're pointed at a shape. But basically, something like a piece of trash or something triggered an alarm, and everyone thought that there was an air raid going on, and there was huge amount of sirens and even preparing for anti-aircraft use, that sort of thing. And the fact is that the Battle of Los Angeles was against nothing. That's famously the Battle of Los Angeles was a bunch of people afraid of quite literally nothing. And of course, here's the thing that Philip Klass was talking about, which was all the 1950s UFO sightings happened to be next to military bases where they were researching new types of aircraft. What a coincidence that the place researching new aircraft had some strange aircraft sightings. And that's the thing that you need to take away from a lot of these things. This is a long-standing pattern of stuff that goes down. And one of the big things about the Public Deceived book that I mentioned earlier is after enough years, you can request a Freedom of Information Act disclosure. That disclosure lets you look up all these classified documents, and they are publicly available. If one person requests it, it becomes available to everyone. And so Klass sat there and compared sightings of UFOs with jet tests, spy plane tests, all that sort of thing. Wouldn't you know, all of these things line up. The thing about that is, though, the only way he was ever going to be able to get those Freedom of Information Act requests is if enough time had passed for him to be able to do this research. So again, on one hand, we want news sources. We want to get breaking news, but at the same time, that guy's research would not have been able to happen in the first few initial years of researching those UFOs. And that's where I want to show you and lead you to in a lot of these research assignments, because what we're going to be doing this week is putting together a list of sources that you found online and that you think are useful. Now, these are going to be sources you find online, not in Galileo, not in your databases. So that's one of the big things I want to see is just something that you've been able to find through searching. Next lecture, we're going to start talking about databases in Galileo, how to put these skills into practice with scholarly databases. What I want you to take away from this is always keep searching. Always keep researching, get more background info. New information is always going to keep coming out. Your search is never going to be perfect, but doing your due diligence is going to support your argument. The more you've researched, the more you filtered out stuff that, while it may agree with you, is not the best for supporting your argument, the stronger your argument is going to be. Just because something agrees with you, always double check. Just because something agrees with you does not mean it's actually a good source.